Okay, the Cleveland Browns lose to the New Orleans Saints 17-10 in a game. I guess it was football-ish. The best thing I can say about it is Cade York didn't miss a kick. Today, I'm joined by Abby Mueller. Bree is on vacation, well-deserved. Just before we got on here, Abby said she's done with the Cavs this season. They're over. So she's going to unload on the Browns. So where are we at with this team right now?
Oh, man. It's interesting. I feel like I should be more disappointed, but I think for me, I came into this season with very limited expectations for this team. So I haven't really allowed myself to become as disappointed with the current results. And obviously it sucks to lose any game. Like, you don't want to lose any game. And I get that. But, even going into this game against the Saints, I was like, this is going to be a fake football game. The weather was going to be the worst game in 40 years or something like that. It was going to be ugly. So I think just having my expectations set with that kind of allowed me to not be so disappointed in the result.
Yeah. So I hated this game. I just hated it because, as you just said, fake is a good word for it. I don't know how mad people want me to get about a game where clearly neither team wanted to play. And you can talk about effort and all this stuff, and some guys may have had more effort than nobody wanted to play in negative 15 degrees. And all the tough talk about warm-ups and guys going shirtless and all that stuff, they all did that. And then 15 seconds of the game, when guys run off the field, they are running right to a heater. They are just anything to try to stay warm, whatever. Obviously the wind was a big factor, but like the whole thing for these 6 games with Deshaun Watson was, let's learn about this football team. I didn't learn anything about this team. And so many people are mad at coaches. Like, how mad should I be at coaches who are coaching a game in which players clearly don't want to play? Like, it's one of those where if they had delayed the game 2 days, the difference would have been about 40 degrees difference. And it's just stupid. It wasn't the only game like that. The Steelers-Raiders game was awful for the same reason. I mean, it's just, it was not worthwhile. And so it's like, and we're going to criticize coaching because that's sort of what we're left with. But like, again, in the same way that the big takeaway, if you're sitting there going, well, why didn't the Browns win? Well, it's because they dropped 3, what would have been 2 touchdowns. They had another ball go off a player's hands that was intercepted, all this. And do you want to cut these guys because they were not good in, as Abby mentioned, the worst weather in 40 years? Like, should we fire Kevin Stefanski because the Browns were not good in, historically awful conditions? Like, is that a good barometer to sort of say this is the mark of a good coach or not? Like, it's very difficult for me to care about any of that stuff. And you and I both picked the Browns to win this game. I think, obviously they could have won it. And there are things that are frustrating about it, but it's just sort of, it was bad football and nobody wanted to be a part of it. And it was so frustrating to watch because like I've got the game and I've got the red zone on and I'm watching this miserable experience. And then like I see all this fun stuff on red zone. You're sitting there going, why can't this be us?
Yeah, no, literally. And I also think I'm just having a hard time, like you kind of mentioned, just drawing any conclusions from this game. Like, I know people want to hound on coaching from this game. And of course there were things that I would have done differently, but at the same time, like you mentioned, there were multiple drop touchdown passes. Like, it's hard to win games when you're dropping a lot of passes, when guys aren't able to have the type of success that they would have in weather that would be, 40 degrees warmer 2 days later. It makes a huge difference in what you can do as a play caller too. So I have a hard time getting mad at it. I think people were also angry about not seeing more like designed runs for Deshaun and things of that nature. But I'm like, it's also, why would you want to run your quarterback that you're paying all of this money to in negative temps and, potentially risk some injury? I just feel like those things were being weighed in the game, and I get being frustrated about them out of context, but in context from this bad weather game, it's hard for me to get angry about it.
Right. So you mentioned the Deshaun Watson thing, and they actually did try to run him more than it appeared. But they did it in the way, other than the QB sweep, which was a pure design quarterback run, and they got it It worked great. They scored a touchdown, coaching. I was completely off topic, but off of that, him going, is that a play you brought from Houston? And Deshaun Watson, maybe he was told this, but he's like, no, that Baker Mayfield ran that to secure the playoff win against Pittsburgh Steelers, which is just like his ability to sort of recall very specific instances, whether it's plays in a game he was just in, it jumps off the page to me. But they ran a bunch of read concepts, but the Saints played in a way that forced Watson to give the ball to the back. And that was, the Saints did well in that, I think. But to your point, no, I don't want to see $230 million quarterback go down in the acclimation games the year before it's supposed to matter. I came out of the game with a whole bunch of questions in regards to play calling. And it was interesting to listen to Kevin Stefanski come out on Monday because he answered a lot of them. So when I sort of previewed what I thought this game might look like, I thought, oh, well, they're going to get nuts with some of the run concepts they want to utilize. I thought they might run the option. I thought they might run some, reverse type stuff, jet sweeps, that type of stuff. And, when he was asked about it, well, first, my question was, obviously, why didn't they do that? The other thing was, and I never really got an answer to this, but I was just curious in watching the game, was footing. It was hard to gauge where it was in terms of how guys were able to sort of cut and do those things. Cause the ground wasn't like the ground didn't appear to be frozen, but it also appeared to be sort of weird and difficult. But anyway, he answered talking about, he was worried about the exchanges and stuff like that. And I sort of get it. On the other hand, I'd be more worried about the exchange from quarterback to receiver down the field in that instance. So those were kind of interesting to me. A lot of people were infuriated the amount of passing the Browns were doing, which was odd to me only because 10 passes came in like the last however much amount of time. And Deshaun Watson was really good throwing the ball there. It looked initially to me like the ball was coming out of his hand funky. And whether that was something that they were messing with the way he was gripping it or gloves or whatever, he seemed to get a better handle on it because the first couple of passes he threw, like right out of his hand, they sort of came out like a knuckleball and sort of looped to his receivers. And then it got fixed real quick and they was throwing the ball off. And the other thing he pointed out, which seemed pretty apparent if you were watching the game, was the team that had the wind at their back threw. The team that didn't. And so when Watson was throwing the ball, they had the wind at their back. And that was, they had the wind in the fourth quarter. So it made all the sense in the world. But, if you're trying to take anything from this with Watson, you're sort of going, he threw the ball well in that situation. I mean, the 3 drop passes were all right on the money. He made a couple of other good throws. The interception that was off David Bell's hands, I thought was forced too much. I thought that was a little bit risky, but nevertheless, it did hit David Bell in the hands. So that stuff was, I thought, productive. The thing that sort of drove me nuts, and again, it's the product. This the whole point of this is Deshaun Watson's trying to catch up to the speed of the game. And then they played in a game that was effectively in slow motion. Yeah. So it was like, hey, Deshaun Watson looks better. Well, he should. Everybody's sort of going at half speed. It seems like right about where he's at. So that was interesting. And the last thing with the Deshaun running thing, and they talked about this, is there was one situation where he rolled to his right and had Donovan Peoples-Jones seemingly at arm's length in front of him and a defender right behind him. And he ended up dumping the ball off to DPJ for 2 yards rather than running it. My impression at that time was I wasn't sure that Deshaun wanted to run the ball in this game. And that is just speculative on my part. That would have been my question. Did he really want to run that much in this game? It seemed like on some of the dropbacks, he may have had opportunities to run the ball. And then on situations like that, he opted not to. So I don't know if that was sort of like an edict from the team that's saying, don't run as much in this one, or if he just chooses to, or if I'm just sort of noticing something that really wasn't there. But that sort of also jumped out to me that he didn't seem to want to run as much in this game as maybe some others.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because there wasn't like an eagerness to do that. And I think the great example is the one you brought up of the DPJ little toss there. Like he had a very clear lane where he could have taken it himself. And I think he saw it, but maybe there was some hesitation there of, do I actually want to do this, in these conditions? So I think that's a definite possibility. Obviously, we won't know for sure, but could be true.
Okay, running the ball. I don't know what year it is outside of my house. It seems like once you leave the state of Ohio, it's 2023 or 2022. It's seemingly about to be 2023 for the most part, at least in terms of football. But inside the state of Ohio, it is 1964. And the only way to win is running the ball. Even when you watched, granted, in slightly less awful conditions, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Oakland Raiders or Las Vegas Raiders throw the ball around. People infuriated that the Browns were throwing, even when it worked. People wanting to slam Nick Chubb, who to me looks like a guy who is not 100%. I know he's dealing with a foot issue. The second half of the season, he has not been as effective. Obviously, a large part of that is factored in by offensive line struggles. It just doesn't look right, and it's not as productive, and it doesn't mean he didn't have a share of good plays. He did. Kareem Hunt did nothing. People want to see Jerome Ford. I get it. People want to see Dearness Johnson. I get it. Clearly somebody, seemingly Stump Mitchell, is saying they aren't there yet, or they still feel this is the best option, similar to, injured Baker Mayfield over at Case Keenum type situation. But I think at the end, it was like 3.6 yards per carry. And you would have thought Chubb was running for 6 yards per tote.
Yep.
The way people were mad. Now, 3rd and 2, 4th and 2, I understand the frustration there. People insist I love everything Kevin Stefanski does. I appreciate his process. I think he is a very, very good offensive coach and play caller. That doesn't mean I love everything. I think that was a situation where I think on one of those plays they probably should run the ball.
Yeah.
And again, I think part of it was because the Saints were so effective handcuffing that Reed stuff. It gave them some problems, but I felt like there were, let's put it this way. There were two things I thought when I saw that 3rd and 2, it seemed like Deshaun Watson was in the pocket the whole way. I was surprised that they did not do some sort of rollout or something that gave him the ability to sort of just go with his legs. Or, obviously straight handoff or a read or something like that could have been another option. But like they were not doing particularly well in short yardage. And the other thing that sort of stood out to me, not only in the situations, but in this game, was it felt like, people hate this when it doesn't work. But this felt like an opportunity, to put Jacoby Brissett out there and put 250 pounds of him going forward and seeing what that might have gained in a couple of instances, just because, that was sort of like, this was the Jacoby Brissett to me strikes me as the ultimate frozen tundra quarterback, because he can just, put his ass into it and, pick up some yards. So there are certainly plays that I could look at and go, yeah, I get it. It doesn't look good when you throw twice in a row in that situation. There are always going to be plays where I sit there and go, I don't know. But people complain, well, they didn't adjust. They did adjust. They adjusted right the hell down the field in the 4th quarter, throwing the ball in the air. That was their adjustment. They found a lot of opportunities. They adjusted, into getting a Amari Cooper wide open. And on that play, Watson was fantastic using his legs, even though he didn't really run, just sort of that threat kept those defensive ends at bay. There were a lot of things you're sitting there going, all right, this is pretty good, but ultimately not enough. They left at least 10 points out on the board. And that was the difference between winning and losing in this.
Yeah, I'm finding it very frustrating, like listening to either the broadcasts or just kind of the national discourse on the Browns right now about the running game and the offensive line. Yeah, I cannot take it anymore because I feel like they're living in like maybe 2 years prior of right now and saying like, oh, the Browns have the best running game and the best offensive line in the league, best running duo, Kareem and Nick Chubb. And like, any Browns fan who has been watching knows that like Kareem has not been the same guy in a long, long time. Nick Chubb, obviously, in the last few games here has kind of been struggling, which could be in part due to injury, like you had mentioned. And then the offensive line has just gone through a range of struggles this year. So it is frustrating to have people continuously saying, why aren't the Browns running the ball more? Because it's not working that well for us anymore. And I'm having a hard time hearing it.
Let's say it worked. Let's say that all the times that everybody wanted Nick Chubb to get the ball more, it would have worked. And Nick Chubb, in a season that doesn't really matter in terms of what they're trying to do, Nick Chubb racks up 400 carries. And he is all pro, and he gets 2,000 yards, and all this is wonderful. And then next year, he's Jonathan Taylor this year. Jonathan Taylor, who had, I think it was like 372 touches in 2021. He had almost 2,200 total yards. All pro. He beat out Nick Chubb that year. And then this year, he has 200 and some touches, 1,000 yards, 2 injuries, and he's out for the season. Like, I tried to look for it, but I couldn't find it. I thought when Nick Chubb got his contract extension, one of the things he sort of said he liked was the fact that the Browns were very cognizant of like taking care of him and trying to make sure that he stays, effective for a long time. Derrick Henry is not common. Like, that doesn't work for everybody. And the Browns have, to their credit, have been pretty good about finding the right balance of what Chubb can do that makes him so effective. And so what you're always left with is Nick Chubb's great. I want more of that. And you have to find the balance of where that sweet spot is. And unfortunately, in 2020, you had that. That was the best Kareem Hunt you were going to get. Last year, he wasn't as effective, and then he goes out for 9 games with the ankle. And this year, he's just cooked. He looks like he's running in a high school alumni game. And he's like, well past, retired, but he's really fired up to play this. He gets the ball once, and you're like, oh man, this is gonna be great. And then like second and third time, he's already done. I don't doubt that he cares. I don't doubt that he's passionate, but one, he is lost a step. There's just no getting around this. And then 2, this is not his fault, but it seems like every time they hand him the ball, the offensive line just gets destroyed. Yes. So what you are left with, and obviously Deshaun Watson in part is going to try to take some of the pressure off and try to take some of the burden off these guys. They need somebody else who can run the ball. And, that may be something that they need to still get. Maybe it's Jerome Ford, maybe it's Dearness Johnson, although he's going to be a free agent. They're going to have to find somebody else to do that, or they are going to have to shift a little bit away from just being a super heavy run team, which incidentally is probably where this is going. And the report that came out, bewildering to me. I'm still confused on this because it's not that like, Jimmy Haslam watches Tennessee football. This is not breaking news to me. Like, I'm aware of this. But like going, well, he really likes what he sees from their Tennessee air raid. And it's like, well, he wants the Browns to pass more. Well, they just traded 6 picks and guaranteed $230 million to this man. You think they're going to use him to pass more? No, they got him to be a more expensive, dollar intensive guy who just hands the ball off. Of course he's going to throw the ball more. They've got to get to that point. But was beyond strange that like this was a report. And it was funny because it sort of buried the lead. The lead was, Jonathan Jones of CBS going that, Kevin Stefanski's safe for this year, which always seemed obvious to me. That they aren't going to mess with this. He's the most successful coach since Marty Schottenheimer in terms of win percentage. He's the first playoff win since Bill Belichick. His 2020 team scored the most points in the season since 1964. You're not going to mess with that, but it's like weird. And, maybe there's another shoe to drop. I don't know, but it just felt like the way that the report was phrased, it was just very strange because to me, it just felt like it was written weird. I felt like it was almost like he was supposed to be saying he can go on about Tennessee football all he wants, but just like, this is why we got this guy. We want to, we want to do all these things more. Being enamored with Josh Heupel is whatever. But it wouldn't surprise me if Kevin Stefanski goes and talks to Josh Heupel for all those benefits. It doesn't mean he needs to put in an air raid offense. But anyway, these are just very strange report to come out, because on the one hand, it's like, apparently it was newsworthy enough for somebody to report. On the other hand, it just feels like the most obvious thing possible.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to figure out why that report would come out in the first place, because like you said, it was pretty obvious stuff. Like, yes, the Browns want to throw the ball more with Deshaun Watson. Like, no kidding. We all realize that. Obviously, at the current moment, they're still getting him acclimated, and you're kind of getting him acclimated in pretty poor weather now. So it is kind of a weird thing where we know next season they're going to see that. So I'm not sure if they're just trying to prepare the fan base, like, hey, we hear you guys. We know like what needs to happen.
That's an interesting angle at this, to be like, this is him like trying to warn you, hey, we may not run the ball 100 times a game next year.
Yeah, because I really don't know what the angle is in general. It's just like, Jimmy wants to pass more. Like, okay, I don't know. I don't know what other angle he has for that. And I just get a little concerned in general when I start seeing Jimmy talk about football in the media. I'm just like, we don't need to hear too much of what you think that the Cleveland Browns should be doing, Jimmy.
Yeah. Again, just very odd. And then the other part that, and I don't know if you caught this, if you watched Jack Conklin's press conference.
I saw some clips, but I didn't see the whole thing.
Tony Grossi, God, I love Tony Grossi. He's so great. Is basically like trying to antagonize Jack Conklin, who's just, he's so happy. He's got his contract extension. And we'll get into that here in a second. But just, he's like something to the effect of, he's basically like, aren't you mad? Something effective. Aren't you mad they didn't pass more? And Jack Conklin's like, no, they call the plays, we execute them, and this, that, and the other, and said, as he often does, we didn't do a good enough job. It's on us to make them right and all this other stuff. And then he comes back and goes, Grossi's like following up angrier, this is such a hilarious contrast, because last week, I swear to God, he was on Valium with how happy he was. He was giddy asking questions after the Browns beat the Ravens. Like, I've never heard him like that. But anyway, he's so angry. He's like, do you really feel like this coaching staff is putting you guys in the best position to succeed? And like, he flatly comes out, and it's so funny because Jack Conklin is so even keeled. He's just this very straightforward, nice guy. And he's like, I trust the play callers, that, without like any wavering or anything. And it was just like, what are we doing? And this, that we just cannot get over this. Like, you get mad. We'll talk about the defense. But like, Taysom Hill is 225 pounds. He's a quote unquote quarterback, but he's there to slam into people as a weapon. Watson isn't. Like, that was a clear disadvantage in that department. That's why I thought maybe they do some other stuff, but like, it made no sense to me that like you were going to try to go blow for blow. And again, that's why you run read things. If it's not there, then you give it to the back, and you don't get your quarterback just whacked. So yeah, but Jack Conklin, it's contract extension. I'll be the first to admit, I did not think they were going to go this route. I thought he was going to walk in the offseason for two main reasons. One, the financial implications. The Browns are going to have to make tougher choices on that front. And then two, his knee. That knee injury is not a small deal. He got torn patella tendon. I was fascinated. Clearly the Browns are saying we think his knee's good, and Jack Conklin's saying no, my knee's great. Part of why he signed, and was interesting because the way he phrased it was a shot at a certain organization, which has the head coach that everybody in Cleveland of a certain persuasion desperately wants to either coach the Browns or the Buckeyes, in Mike Vrabel. And he talked about how much this was before the contract extension. I guess he must have, he told Mary Kay he didn't know anything about negotiations. I assume he had to know something but him talking about how happy he was with how the Browns coaching staff and training staff sort of like were really good to him in terms of making sure they did it right in terms of his rehab. He admitted he was apprehensive about coming off that knee injury because he knew it was a serious deal, and he was like grateful. And he said specifically, he didn't call out names, but he goes, you know, there are a lot of teams that just take somebody who comes off injury and they throw them right back in there and grind right back on them. Now, he didn't say it, but I know which team he played for last time, and I know what that team does to players when they come off injury. Like, there's something to be said for that. And the people who are like mad that, you know, any number of things, like one person immediately responds and be like, you know, because you have to practice here. It's like, come on. Like, no, they don't do anything here. They don't make a practice at all. So Conklin says, you know, he's happy about the knee, thinks it's going to be even better with an offseason, fingers crossed, nothing happens in the next 2 weeks. But it's, given everything that sort of happened this week, it was like this weird oasis of like positivity that, like, you know, they're coming off the loss. They're 6-9. They're going to have a losing season. You've got this story, I guess, kind of ish with Myles Garrett. It feels like a nothing deal, but maybe it's a something deal. And all these things are going, well, maybe we should fire the coach. Maybe we should fire. God knows we have to fire Paul DePodesta, despite the fact we don't know what his job actually is. But God damn it, he's at the heart of this. And then Jack Conklin's like, yeah, I love it here. I want to spend my whole life here. I you know, Cleveland's home. I love what's going on. And like, there has to be, you know, and maybe he would have signed it anyway. Maybe, you know, maybe 40 or $60 million was just, you know, he's gonna be like, no, I'm going to take that regardless. But it has to feel like when you have Jack Conklin signing, Wyatt Teller signing, Joel Bitonio signing, David Njoku signing, Denzel Ward signing, extensions, and obviously Deshaun Watson acquired, he gets a big contract, that they don't want to just start over and have to do this whole thing where they want to, you know, I don't think Jack Conklin was thinking, yeah, I'm going to sign this, and then in 20 minutes, they're going to fire the guy. I'm going to lose. And it's not just Kevin Stefanski at that point. They do not want to lose Bill Callahan. They just don't. And those things matter to these guys. And I think people, you know, they don't account for the fact that even if you don't feel like it's starting over, the players certainly do when it comes to that sort of dramatic change, that they feel like, no, they're not happy with it, where the season was, but they also sort of understand what the season is and are looking forward to next year, which is why it's interesting. Like, you know, you get, and I'm sure you get this too, people are like, no, the team's quit on the coaches and all this crap, which you watch this team with Deshaun Watson and they're like super energized. Everybody's super motivated. They want to play, you know, they're all like talking about the process. They sort of understand that Watson's got to get acclimated and all this other stuff. And they're like giving him all of the break in terms of not trying to put too much on him. And, you know, maybe a trip to Bahamas does that for you, but just all these things are happening. And like, I try to, you know, be as neutral as I can be. And, you know, I want the Browns obviously to succeed, but like, I'm like you, I didn't have expectations this season. So I'm not mad about this. This is sort of what I expected to happen. Am I the one who's insane on this in terms of like not being crushed at all these things that are allegedly going on? You know, where, you know, I should say, are me and Jack Conklin both insane?
No, you are not insane. And I think part of it is what we said about having lower expectations coming into the season. But I think it's also seeing those positive things, like the way Jack Conklin has talked about this team, the different extensions that they have made in recent years. I still also have a belief in Kevin Stefanski. And look, here's the thing that I think gets to me with this conversation is that if you get rid of Kevin Stefanski, let's say they do try to start over, I feel like everyone thinks that just firing a coach and bringing in a new coach is some magical solution that is going to cure everything. And that is just not realistic whatsoever. Like you said, there's coordinators, there's different people who are a part of the organization that guys here don't want to lose and completely start over with. And that is I think a huge thing that people don't factor in when they just think that firing a coach is kind of this cure all for everything. And bringing in someone else could go quite possibly much worse than what we even did this season. So I don't think you are crazy at all for feeling that way. And I'm with you with Jack Conklin. I also, you mentioned the Miles thing, which I did want to touch on because that statement came out from Kevin Stefanski about how he was benched for a series to start the game. And later it came out that it was a disciplinary thing for Miles not talking about his sickness that he had, not mentioning it to the team and the staff, and then had to be disciplined for it. And I just find it funny that the same people who are so mad that Kevin Stefanski did this, or the same people who say that Kevin never holds anyone accountable, that Kevin is, has no control over these players, that they don't respect him. And then Kevin does what most organizations do, which is when you break a rule on the team, there are consequences for it. And he put those consequences into place, even if it is your top caliber players on the team. And I feel like Miles would honestly respect that. I don't want to speak for him. Maybe he is upset with it, but I think he would be like, yeah, I should be held to the same standard as everyone else. And I think a lot of players would appreciate that. So this decision that everyone has made that Miles must have this horrible rift with Kevin Stefanski, it does feel a little bit weird to me because I don't think we know that to be true at all.
So there's several things here. First, I have heard this, and I know if you've heard this. They could fire a coach, and then they could hire, a Kevin, the dude, the Kevin O'Connell or whatever his name is, KOC for the former Browns coach with the Vikings, or all these coaches having a bunch of first year success. Mm-hmm. You mean like Kevin Stefanski? Like Kevin Stefanski going 11-5 in his first
literally
year. And and then like with that, like you also then go, well, teams are going to have a chance to adjust and figure you out and some of those other things. And what I would point to is like, even though people are going to be like, well, he went 8-9 his second year. Well, there were a whole lot of injuries his second year. And then his third year, well, yeah, they just traded everything for Deshaun Watson, who was then out for 11 games. Let's say somehow they made the playoffs with this current outfit. How would they do? Like, I get it. You're going to be like, well, they got a chance in the tournament. Sure, they've got a chance in the tournament. They are not on Buffalo's level. They're not on Kansas City level. They could potentially steal one from Cincinnati. Obviously, they've beaten them before, although it would make me feel better if Watson was sort of, at the peak of his powers again. Mm-hmm. But like, you look at these teams and you're like, they are not playing the same sport right now. So like, I understand you want to, this weird obsession with, you have to have this progression. It has to get better. Like, that's not how this works. And like, people are arguing with me about all these, you can't have 2 losing seasons in a row. Sean Payton had 3. He went 7-9, 3 years with Drew Brees as his quarterback. Like, it happens. And it's, NFL is hard. Every season's different. You got all these things, but like, don't get me wrong. 2023 is where, you have to deliver, or things are going to be, there could be some really tough questions and potentially moving on. But like, you hear these things about culture and all this stuff. You have to build this stuff. Like, people go, hey, Mike Tomlin, look at all that. He inherited a winning culture from Bill Cowher, who inherited a winning culture from Chuck Noll, and everybody has to then sort of cater to it. You either, you grow it from there, or you maintain it, or you let it corrode. And they've been fortunate to keep that thing going. But like, the Browns don't have anything, and you're wondering why that's the case when you keep knocking down the scaffolding before they even have a chance to do it. Myles Garrett, I'm not going to say that anybody lied to Mary Kay Cabot because I don't think that's what happened. I'm also inclined to think it's a little bit bigger than just he did not report an illness, but I don't think he has an issue with Kevin Stefanski. I think he has an issue with Joe Woods. And that doesn't mean that he thinks Joe Woods is a bad coordinator. Although it's possible. I think Myles is sort of somebody where, Myles is very intelligent. Myles is very accomplished. I think Myles has a very difficult time with people who sort of, he doesn't believe are sort of as invested as he is in things, and I think his patience can run very short. And you sort of see that with his sort of leadership style. He's flat out admitted he can't be that guy all the time. I think part of it, I think once he decides that he thinks he's dealing with children or somebody inferior, in that way, he sort of is an NBA superstar in just sort of how he operates. So would it shock me to hear that, like, that like he has in the past, that Myles Garrett, said something disrespectful or inappropriate to Joe Woods, either during, in the heat of battle or sort of at a meeting of some sort? No. But you also have to hold your best player the most accountable. He's supposed to be a leader. You have to set that tone with him. And no, you don't want Myles Garrett to be somebody who's getting disciplined, but that doesn't mean you don't do it just to say you aren't, just to sort of look like everything's fine. You have to do it. And whether or not that, that makes him slightly upset, I don't think he's going to sit there and go, like a lot of people are like, if you have to decide between Kevin Stefanski and Myles Garrett, why? Like, yeah, why? Again, it's not the NBA. This isn't how it works. You can't just fire your coach like that. I mean, ultimately, 53 guys on this team could if they really wanted to, but I don't get that sense. But I think Myles Garrett has made it clear that even though you and I have reasonable expectations, he has expectations of himself. And expectations of himself, part of that was going to the postseason this year. Part of that was progressing from last year. And that is hard for him, even though some of that is his own fault. I don't know what actually happened in the car, but he got in a car wreck. Was that a fluke situation? Was that his own, being irresponsible? I'm not going to gauge on that, but in that sense, he sort of let his teammates down. I think that's sort of part of this, is that he gets very, like I said, he expects so much of himself that as he also expects a lot from people around him. So, I like Joe Woods. I think he's an affable guy. I enjoy his press conferences. He's very open and honest. He tries to give you the best answer he can. I don't think he's going to be around much, after the season. And I think that has a chance to sort of refresh that group. I don't think life is fair in the NFL. That's just how it is. I mean, Joe Woods, you can certainly make an argument that he's sort of not been given the tools to really succeed, but he also hasn't done as much as he probably could with what he has had. So if they do ultimately replace Joe Woods, I think that hire is going to be important. And I think that hire is also going to potentially be very good for that defense and very good for Myles Garrett. And it's going to be very good for young players who need, I think in some ways, I don't like using the phrase like a different voice, because I think that there's some very weak connotations, but I think in this case, they need to get somebody who's going to be a little bit more demanding in terms of guys doing what they're supposed to do. Now, I think the Browns are also going to sign veterans to sort of help deal with some of that, but I do think that gives them an opportunity to sort of reset from that standpoint. Like, to me, there's inherently a whole lot of, pressure on 2023. And I wrote on this, I think it's a major opportunity. Like, that's, every crisis is an opportunity type thing. Some, crappy wisdom. But if you look at this and you go, okay, Kevin Stefanski, 3 years in, he's 40. He's going to keep getting better at this the more experience he has. I'm hoping he's able to continue and get better. I also hope that he's going to come out of this season and go, all right, I got the quarterback I wanted. I got 6 games. I gathered all this information. I tried to get a feel for him. I tried to, I spent all this time in the quarterback room, and some of the stuff I hear out of that, I absolutely love. I love hearing Deshaun Watson and Jacoby Brissett being like, yeah, he's in the quarterback room all the time. He wants feedback. If I don't like something, he takes it out of the game plan. He wants me to be comfortable. He wants my input. He wants to know how I feel about things. And that also plays out during the game. And I think that has been a way to fast track trust within that organization. And I have every reason to believe that during the suspension, that even though Deshaun Watson couldn't talk to Kevin Stefanski, I suspect Jacoby Brissett was talking to Deshaun Watson, and Deshaun Watson, because they are friends, they are, they have the same, Quincy Avery works with both of them, I believe. I know they're friends, but anyway, that they have this relationship, and basically Jacoby Brissett, who clearly really likes Kevin Stefanski, is saying, look, man, this is great. I get to do this, all these things that put me in comfortable positions. Kevin Stefanski comes in, and he, in a way that I still am very surprised at how aggressive he's been, but thinking about it more, I sort of understand that he changed his offense over so much to Deshaun Watson. And then, thinking on it now, it's like, I get it, because you're sitting there going, well, he's got all this stuff in, we can see what we like, we see what we don't like. And it gives me all this information to work with. I get to know what he wants to do more. And then I head into this off season, and I get to, really figure out how I want to design this offense around him. And I think that's really useful. So like this is like the thing Kevin Stefanski's waiting his whole life to do, is to be able to be the head coach of a team and design an offense around the quarterback he really wanted. And that was Deshaun Watson. He gets to do all these things. On top of that, he also gets to go, no, I want, and maybe it could be Joe Woods. I don't think it will be Joe Woods, but it's his call to make. And I hope to God nobody says you have to do this. He's got to make that call. But if it's not Joe Woods, he goes, no, this is what I want to do on defense. I'm going to get exactly what I want. I've done this long enough. I'm going to go out on my terms, which thankfully he's been, admire him for when people whine about fourth downs, and he's like, no, this is what I do. Yeah, that's what I want in my coach. I want a guy who's going to say, no, this is what I do. Same thing with Prefer. You get this opportunity to be like, no, we're going to do it this way. And we're going to, incorporate all these things. I really like that in terms of where this could go for this team, and why I think one of many, many reasons why I think it's worthwhile in going to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested to see what he is going to do with those coordinator positions. In terms of like what we have seen in more recent weeks, I do think it's interesting that people say Kevin Stefanski does not adjust, because as you kind of just laid out, he's been in like a constant adjustment throughout the season, specifically with Deshaun coming back. He is really trying to mix and match different things, see what's going to work for Deshaun, see what he likes. And I feel like as much as people wanted to win in these final 6 games with Deshaun here, I think it really is been an opportunity for Kevin to take a look at everything and say, okay, what are we going to do next season, and what is going to set us up for success then? Not as much like winning these individual games right now, which is of course always the goal. But I think that overarching idea going into these 6 games has been the bigger message for sure. And I'm really excited to see what he's going to be able to do next season.
Yeah, defensively in this game, again, guys didn't want to be out there. You didn't have Jadeveon Clowney, that didn't help. I also looked at this, and I was sort of irritated in sort of some of the things I saw from players that didn't go well, like 3rd and 8, giving up a pass where seemingly no one was like, they were just like, okay. I don't fault defensive play calling for that. There's clearly somebody who's supposed to be there on that particular play. But the Browns were so good or I should say the Saints were so good at forcing the Browns to give the ball to Chubb, and then they collapsed on that. The Browns were awful at doing that to the Saints, and they allowed Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara to both be threats, and now they have to keep track of both of them, and that really put a strain on them. Every time Andy Dalton took a snap, it was a favor, including dropping 2 snaps and throwing the pick to Grant Delpit. Grant Delpit had a great game in a lot of respects, but it was genuinely irritating to watch some of the stuff they do. And I get it. Some of that's talent. They're hurting for guys. They're on linebackers 6, 7, 8, and 9 at this point. People were complaining they should have put a 5-man front in. They didn't have 5 guys to put in a 5-man front. Chase Winovich sucks. Like that was what you were down to at that point. It was like him and Isaiah Thomas, and like, so 5-man front was just giving you would be giving the Saints an easy way to be just like, oh, they're all there, we're just going to run around them. So I didn't have a problem with this personnel usage, but I do think they did not do themselves some favors in terms of how they were able to stop the run, and some of the other, some of the ways they struggled dealing with the pass. weren't great either. And again, a lot of that comes down to the elements and all that, but it just seemed like the Saints had a better game plan to stop the opposing run game than the Browns did. We've talked about defensive tackle being an issue. Again, you don't have 5 guys to put them at 5-man front. That's part of it. The Saints were able to lean on them at times and just sort of push their way a little bit and gain some extra yardage. Again, this is where I sort of look at this and go, I like Joe Woods, but it's not difficult to figure out why the Browns can do better, and ultimately why I think they will try to do better. It was just frustrating. And then, again, it wasn't a huge. They had 2 drives that really amounted to most of their points, and they wrapped around the half. They drove down. The one score that was into the wind was their drive before the half. They got the field goal, and then they came out in the second half when they had the wind at their back and went down the field and scored a touchdown. That was 10 points. They got the other 7 courtesy of an interception that got them to the Browns 15-yard line. So as much as, again, I don't want to sit here and beat up players and stuff for playing in this condition, but I found some of the things that were happening in that game just irritating, in addition to just being disgusted by watching it in general.
Yeah, I think sometimes I was just thinking about this with the Joe Woods conversation. To his credit, like you mentioned, sometimes it is just a talent thing. Like, I do think we really overestimated the talent on this defense, and then injuries on top of that just really caused a lot of issues. Like you said, the linebacker room has just been decimated for the majority of the season. Like, it was early on that we started losing guys. Anthony Walker in like week 3, I think that was. The defensive tackles ended up being some of the lowest or worst in the league. And it is hard to scheme around that kind of stuff. Like you said, I'd still like to see some level of success in it, but to his credit, it is the player's job at the end of the day to actually make those plays. And if you don't have the talent there, it's just not going to happen.
Right. So, and I wasn't kidding. I was happy to see Cade York make both kicks. I've
been on an emotional roller coaster with that this season too. That's the other one.
Well, all of his issues seem to come on one side. It's that right hash. So to me, I don't sit here and claim to know, be an expert on kicking. Although on the flip side of that is I'm not going to just dismiss it all as a mental block or
right.
He just doesn't have it. That doesn't do anything. But nevertheless, he's missed eight kicks this year. I don't know how many of those were blocked. He's a rookie in Cleveland. It's got to get better.
Right.
Whether or not Prefer's here next year, that's part of it. That's part of that question is, do they believe that Prefer can sort of get that sorted out? Because Prefer obviously had to be a big proponent of saying, no, let's take Cade York and let's take him as early as we did.
Yeah.
That becomes like the whole thing. I would like to, look, he's going to get next year. That's,
yeah,
he crushed. I mean, and the other part of that, he's crushed it all summer. Mm-hmm. So it's just getting accustomed to the weather. I've seen some interesting stuff in terms of his plant foot and where that's aimed at relative to where the ball is going. But again, it's the right hash. I think people need to figure that out. And what I immediately think of is if the Browns we're in a position where they have to cut him, which I don't think they will, that he immediately ends up on a dome team and kicks 65-yarders routinely.
Without a doubt.
Like the thing that people seem to want to ignore is that like Phil Dawson was 8 of 12 as a rookie. He did not attempt a 50-yard field goal until his 4th season. I think Kate, obviously there are a lot of things I think the Browns came to the season with and have been disappointed with, defensive tackle being one of them. I think there's some other positions where they're probably safety. They're probably not as happy. They're probably disappointed in the return on investment they've gotten at that position. I think they expected York to be better than he was. That does not mean that it's bad, because I think you sort of also can bake that into everything else that you're sort of looking at 2022 and going, this is really for 2023. I think Cade York is a part of that. That doesn't mean that Cade York is doing well. Obviously, he's got to get better, but I do think you have to sort of incorporate that into that thought process in terms of what that means. Now, if we're dealing with this next year, it becomes a nightmare at that point. But my personal philosophy of this is you rarely lose because of your kicker. Rarely, most of the time it's because you didn't score enough touchdowns. We've got to see that get better. And to the Browns' credit, they didn't hesitate. I thought they might go for 2 in that game. I think if they had scored the touchdown at the end, I think they would have gone for 2. But I'm happy to see them continuing to put him out there because I think they sort of see it the same way. They're basically like, look, he's got to figure this thing out. We're going to keep sending him out there. We're going to keep getting him kicks. Now, the thing I would sort of also note is that people are like, well, this is why they go for it more on 4th down. It's not. They're going to go for it on 4th down a lot anyway. Even more if Deshaun Watson is really, really good. And they get him going in the right way. They're going to be super aggressive because 6s are worth more than 3s. They just are. It's not difficult to figure out the math on that one. So I am interested to see how that goes. I've got my theory my plan, my proposal of between the mini camp and training camp, you send them to the Southern Hemisphere, Argentina, Chile, maybe Nepal, have them kick in the Himalayas for a while. And then come back out of Rocky IV training in Russia and let's go. But because I just don't know if there's another good way for him to get better at it other than to continue to do it.
Yeah. I think maybe lower expectations just in general for him are better too, because I feel like I was guilty of hyping him up a lot this season. Many people were, especially when you draft a kicker that high. But I always think now of with the Bengals and Evan McPherson, he kind of carried them into, a lot of playoff wins with some game-winning kicks. And then anytime he has missed this year, Bengals fans have lost their minds because they thought, they had this game-saving kicker that was always going to be able to do that for them. And those are very rare. Not everyone is Justin Tucker, who Justin Tucker even has his own struggles, some coming this year.
Back-to-back weeks with a block kick.
I know, which is crazy. Who would have thought? So I think maybe it's a good place for him to be, just to not have this you are going to save this team and you are the next Phil Dawson. We can take things a step back this time.
Well,
partially.
No, go ahead. I was going to say Evan McPherson was 83% his rookie year, or no, he's 83% this year. I think. I don't remember what he was as a rookie, but that is not normal. He just had a great run.
It was a great run. Yeah.
Now, we'll see what happens. I mean, the Bengals look like they're in good shape to make the postseason. We'll see if they get this magical ride again. But to me, kicker continues to be the relief pitcher of football, and those seem to be almost every other year, except when you have Mariano Rivera and Justin Tucker, the one guy who sort of figures it out. Everybody else, Young-Ho Koo, the Atlanta Falcons kicker, who is paid $24 million. And I remember a number of Browns beat reporters insisting the Browns go get this man. He has not been great. Chris Boswell was another one who got signed to a big contract by the Steelers, who has not been great. Don't get me wrong. I understand the frustration.
Yeah.
But, we'll see where they end up as far as that goes and what that looks like. Again, because what I fully expect to happen is Cade York is going to go into training camp and crush it every day. And everybody's going, oh, Cade York's great. Cade York's great. So, and now it may change and be well, we've seen this before, and that becomes the new conversation. But I suspect he's going to continue to just absolutely be great in training camp and preseason and all that stuff. Yeah. And then we're sort of all sitting there hoping he figures it out.
Yeah, no, I agree, because that was kind of the narrative this summer. I went to a few days of training camp and he's crushing it from long distance, but I think it is going to be more about, like you said, figuring out how to kick in cold weather, and that right hash as well that has been giving him trouble all year. It'll be interesting though. I think, like you said though, there's not many great kickers out there. the alternative is to go find someone else that might also not make kicks in first energy, because there's one Justin Tucker and there's everyone else looking for a Justin Tucker. So that's just kind of the reality of the kicking situation. It's a gamble for most years.
Well, I mean, the Browns cut Chase McLaughlin, and Chase McLaughlin has been great for the Colts.
Yep.
So, again, dome team, more reason to build a dome.
Yes, please.
But yeah, it's sort of interesting to see where that goes. To me, like, look, the last two games are certainly important. I would like to see the Browns win both of them. I think they can win both of them. Mm-hmm. I think that would be good for them. Obviously, they're motivated to do all these things, but bigger picture, again, this is another reason I want to see Kevin Stefanski remain in the job. I want to see what they do with another year. And what I mean by that is, again, we talk about, building a winning culture and all this stuff. I'm curious to see what that looks like in that regard. Clearly, the big thing for him is going to be getting Deshaun Watson and the offense and everything going in the right way. But what is he going to do to sort of continue to make improvements that are going to improve this way? Because the Browns took some gambles with their roster construction. And what I mean by that is, like, when coming out of last year, the Browns had a whole lot of veteran on defense and they let walk. And, none of these guys were superstars, but they were all, role players, and they seemingly adults. When they traded for Watson, they got they just allowed a whole lot of young guys on this team. It clearly, early in the year, it bit them. It hurt. It hurt them in any number of ways. The defense is underperformed. It's not as good as it should be, just in terms of, they have talented individual parts, but they don't have a great whole right now. Obviously, if they go with a new coordinator, which seems likely, that's part of it. But, what does that look like in terms of Kevin Stefanski trying to take hold and instill that professionalism, which it seems like they have on offense. We don't, and maybe I'm missing it and we're just not seeing it, but I mean, you just look at the offense, they're adults for the most part. Kareem Hunt, well, maybe, but they're adults. They've got a whole bunch of guys out there. Jedrick Wills is young and he's in his third year. Like, he's the young guy. Harrison Bryant is a young guy. David Bell is a young guy, but they're not, Donovan Peoples-Jones is in his third year. Those, defensively, Jedrick Wills, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Harrison Bryant would be like,
that's
KG veterans on this, like grizzled, guys have seen their way through a number of wars. Again, maybe we're missing something on offense, but one, it seems like, in addition to the fact they've gotten adults, they're just grown men with lives. I mean, like, Joe Bitonio's got kids running around, Jack Conklin's, they're too old to be, dealing with bullshit. They're grown-ups. They also seem to have picked people who are just mature on that. Like, Amari Cooper is a very mature guy. Like, I've contrasted him against Jarvis Landry. They have different styles, but they're both adults in their own different way. What I'm curious to see, among the things that they need to sort of get righted is, and it goes beyond Stefanski. I think ownership is a part of this, and the organization as a whole is what are they going to do to sort of get the defense and just the team as a whole to be a more professional operation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I had seen someone tweet the other day about how, David Njoku had his shirt off pregame, and that the wide receivers and the tight ends all just like to post on Instagram. And I'm like, I feel like this group is not like that at all. Like, they are a very professional group that just seems to really like to play together. Like you said, they still, even with 2 games left and we are out of playoff contention, like, they still have seemed excited to figure things out together as an offense, which I think is promising for the future. But I do feel like it is the most adult group we have had on offense in quite some time. And that starts with some of those offensive linemen you said that are, more veteran. And then having kind of Amari Cooper be such a calming presence for a wide receiver one that you don't always find. And I've enjoyed watching them all play together. And I think it is a good group. And I would like to see some more of that veteran presence on defense. I think we talked about with Anthony Walker, when he went out, it was like such a gaping hole because he was one of the only real veteran leaders that was a vocal leader on that defense. So having more guys like that, I think is going to be important next year, because we definitely missed it for sure. You could tell it was just like, who do we look to at this point? Nobody really knew.
Yeah, that was negligence on their part. That was poorly handled, that to have Anthony Walker effectively be the guy who's supposed to hold this thing together. Obviously, it's fair to say John Johnson has been sort of disappointing on that end.
Yeah.
And I think the Browns also thought, that JOK and Greg Newsome are going to sort of grow into that, because they looked so mature and so seemingly prepared as rookies. I don't think that has happened in the way they would have hoped. I don't think Denzel Ward has been quite what they would have hoped. He's just not had a good season. I think that's sort of where his energy's been. But I think, one, they just miscalculated, and then two, they took what it was a reckless path on that side of the ball. And that's part where you go, you look at Joe Woods and you go, it's not fair to Joe Woods. That doesn't mean he gets another crack at this, but that's the part you're sitting there going, what am I supposed to do with a bunch of children essentially and try to make this thing work? Defensive linemen were not ready for this. I mean, Jordan Elliott, basically came into year 3 and said, no, I didn't really work that hard the first 2 years. Well, and you've had some nice surprises. I think David Bryan's okay. I'll be interested to see what happens with him, honestly. I don't want to see him come back for a big contract, but I kind of want to see him come back. I hope there's a way that can work. I don't know if he should start, but just I think perfect role for him as a rotational guy, but as a nice depth piece. But they need more out of that. And unfortunately, like, this is the thing when they brought him in. That's not what Jadeveon Clowney is. That was something Olivier Vernon did. That's not who Jadeveon Clowney is. It doesn't mean he's a bad teammate, or it's just that's not been his thing. And we mentioned Miles and sort of he's selective. And I think part of that is I think he was sort of he's been frustrated by being sort of surrounded by children in some ways, and sort of babysitting in that regard. Now, I think, there are guys, I think he and JOK are very close. Seemingly that's the impression I get, that he sort of sees somebody he can look at and go, yeah, this is somebody who sort of gets it and is trying to do all the right things. So that becomes a major piece of this. Now,
do you think Clowney comes back next season?
I'm inclined to think he does. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, I don't think the Browns brought him. Look, they were sort of stuck in a lot of ways when, his free agency flies by. They're still sitting here talking to Watson. And they finally get that done. And they go, oh crap, we have to sort of fill out the rest of this roster. Right. And obviously Clowney is always a guy who takes forever to make decisions on contracts. He's not a fan of, say, OTAs. But he took less, some people will dispute it, but allegedly he had been offered a 3-year, $45 million contract from the Jets, but he made it clear that he really wanted to play with Deshaun Watson. He took less to do that. That's part of it. And obviously if he's to come back, that will be, part of it. Frankly, I think we got a more typical Clowney season. Yes, he's very talented, but inconsistent health-wise and some other things, and not quite the impact as last year, which was just a phenomenal season for him. But I think he and Anthony Walker were both two guys that were signed with the idea of also bringing them back in 2023. Obviously, with Anthony Walker, I have no way of knowing what his health status is. And unfortunately, the Sione Takitaki thing just added another wrench into that mix where it takes away another option. So Anthony Walker may or may not be sort of like almost by default even though, obviously they like him. I don't love the idea of paying him $5 million. Hopefully, something can get worked on that front. And then you've got Deion Jones, who's going to be free agent. Deion Jones has been sort of better than maybe I thought he would be, but also not great. So yeah, I look at those two, and as long as Clowney's like, yeah, I'm game. Yeah. I want to come back for a cheaper deal, or that allows the team to sort of accomplish their goals. Then yeah, I think he and Walker would both be back. I don't think. Obviously, the Browns had to get a starting defensive end. They were not going to go in with like, "Hey, Alex Wright, you're starting."
Right.
No, they didn't have to go with Clowney, and I do think there was something to be said for free agents being very concerned with what Watson's status really was, because at that time we had no idea. Mm-hmm. I think that will change. Maybe there's some other options that sort of change that dynamic, and maybe they bring in somebody else. I suppose a lot of that will depend on, again, who's the defensive coordinator. If they get somebody and they're like, well, he's not a great fit, I mean, obviously that could change things. But I think in general, it makes sense for him to come back. Now, I say that, and I still think they need to draft another defensive end. I like Alex Wright. I think he can be okay. I don't know if he's ever going to be a starter, but even if he is, I still think they should get another guy. And they could sign a guy. Like, nothing would make me happier than Jerry Hughes being like, hey, I would love to come to Cleveland for not much money and sort of fill out that pass rush or something along those lines. But yeah, I think he comes back. I think Walker comes back. Still have questions about linebacker. I think even if you Walker, you then need to sort of start working on who's your Mike backer for the future. I suspect the Browns will figure out a way to sign Sione Takitaki, even if it's like on a weird 1 year thing with him. But like even then, it's going to depend on the knee, and it may not be like, it may not happen until sort of later in the year with his health situation. But yeah, look, defensive line is the whole thing for this team. I think linebacker has a very correlative relationship with defensive line play. Yeah. Jadeveon Clowney can be really good. But as I said, I don't know who that would be that would come in and be, as a defensive coordinator, be like, I'm not interested in that. Like, let's say, Jim Schwartz, who's currently working as like a special advisor for the Tennessee Titans defense, was to take the job. And maybe he's like, I'd probably rather get somebody with a little more of an edge rush threat off that side. Maybe there's a situation where you sit there and go, okay. With that being said, like, that's the part where you're sitting there going, I wish they would have done their deals differently with that thought process in mind, because obviously, look, they signed contracts into sort of defer money to be able to roll it over. So you sitting there going, well, maybe they should have done something a little bit more like that. But I also think that part of the reason that Clowney and Walker were kept, for people who are like, well, they should just, let them walk and kept, what would have been about $14 million or something around there in cap space, and then rolled that over. Cap space is great, but they also wanted to have a team that looks attractive for potential free agents rather than a team that's done its cap space and an enormous amount of holes. I think they wanted to sort of present a team, and obviously this is why winning these last couple of games becomes important. I think Deshaun Watson gets it. I think the team gets it, that like this could really help them out, is to sort of present a thing where, let's say a guy the Browns play this week who may or may not be available in free agency in a couple months goes, it would really help us out if he decided to defect during the game. But if he doesn't, at least if he's looking across the line and going, or enters free agency and he comes in and goes, well, one, that offensive line kicked my ass this week. That would be helpful. But two, if he also goes, hey, man, there's a lot going on in that defense, and I can see myself playing in it and being a factor in it, that's helpful, as opposed to, more holes, and you're sitting and go, yeah, there's Myles Garrett, there's Denzel Ward, there's some of these guys, but man, there's really not enough going on there. Maybe I'm not as inclined. So I think that becomes a whole conversation in that. But so the Browns are a team that loves to give themselves options. And that's part of what this whole 1-year deal with, even though, financially it's not the greatest thing in the world. It gives him one. Clearly, Clowney is a guy who I think in some ways needs that incentive to work hard.
Yeah.
I don't think he's lazy, but I do think I never saw Jadeveon Clowney more motivated than when it was worth like $100,000 more for him to get 2 sacks last year. And all of a sudden he's like killing dudes
Elite.
left and right. That gives them the option. And if it doesn't work, then they can go in a different direction. The same thing with Anthony Walker. They really like him. They really like what he offers this team. Obviously, I think it's clear that they put too much on him in an unrealistic manner that bit them. But if depending on his health situation or if there's another good option, they could go in a different direction. I think that's sort of where this ends up with that. But linebacker is sort of this big question mark because you've got JOK, and I like what I'm seeing from Tony Fields, but he essentially plays the same position. And then it's Mike linebacker, and if they're going to have a Sam, true Sam, and you're sitting there going, I don't know if we have this. Although Reggie Ragland, greatest linebacker of all time for seven solo tackles this week. So who knows? But that's the thing is you've got all these questions to figure out. And that's why, again, it's a crisis undoubtedly, but it's a major opportunity for them to sort of reshape their defense. And the fact that they have not been able to get some of these positions to work out the way they wanted to with their draft picks adds to the things they have to address. Undoubtedly, Perry and Winfrey is at least interesting. But you look at a guy like Jacob Phillips, this is not going well. But then again, Tony Fields, maybe, kind of interesting. So as you're sort of going into this offseason and they don't do anything stupid, that they get this sort of new life in terms of how they can sort of approach things and how they can sort of set that path forward. And then they can sort of allow themselves to be a completely different group. And they don't have to be a top 5 defense. They just can't be a 29th ranked defense. If their offense is as we hope it is, all the Browns really need to do is stop giving up big plays. Mm-hmm. That has been the thing that just kills them is they will do great things. And this is sort of this is sort of the legacy of Joe Woods is they will do great things for series and forced punts, and then they'll get, just beat for something stupid or give up an explosive play or have a letdown for whatever reason. And they give up. If they can just be consistent enough to not get killed on those explosive plays, I think they're top 5 worst in terms of explosive plays this year. That stuff makes a big difference. So, you get the opportunity to reset the defense. You get the opportunity to sort of pick and choose who you really want. I think some of this was sort of, I think this was part of the thought process of the season, but it hurt them is we got to figure out who can sink or swim and who wants to be a part of this and who wasn't. And I think they didn't do enough accounting to figure this could go really wrong.
Too much sinking.
Yes. And be this could go really wrong. And not only is it that these guys aren't doing what we need them to do, it's now actually hurting everybody else. Mm-hmm. And we get this sort of thing. So now what I run into is I get people posting screenshots of Pro Football Focus and going, well, Andrew Berry can't draft because these guys' grades are all around 65 or lower, which is really a bad way to sort of evaluate things. For one thing, the guy that you and I would both like to see in Cleveland, Daron Payne, is currently graded at 56.6. That's terrible by Pro Football Focus standards, but Pro Football Focus also rates him as the 12th best free agent.
He's had a good year.
But he's good, but it does, for whatever reason, it just the way he plays just doesn't grade out well for them. Mm-hmm. Likewise, Jack Conklin is a 67 or something for the year, and he was their 18th best free agent. It's weird that the people who take these numbers and hold them as gospel when PFF doesn't. It's always really interesting to me, but it also ignores the fact that if you have, for example, you have god awful defensive tackles. Yeah, Myles Garrett can have an unbelievable PFF grade, but it's going to hurt your linebackers and it's going to hurt your DBs. It all sort of collects. Of course, you're not seeing screenshots from last year when JOK had a 76 grade and he was great and everybody loved Andrew Berry. That type of stuff is just really obnoxious that I keep running into this stuff is like it's bad faith arguments to say that they're not doing well when, that's really not how this works. And like typically teams that are good, like a lot of guys grade out really well. Like the Philadelphia Eagles tend to just grade out really well because they have a whole lot of good players. And the Browns aren't a great team, so they're not going to grade out really well. They do reasonably well on offense, but defensively they're, it's not where it needs to be. So like to then say, and if you don't like Joe Woods, and then you would obviously factor that in and say, well, this is part of the reason they're not grading out well, that he's not doing a good job. So there are many credible ways to argue that certain people are not doing well. And there's certain, obviously Andrew Berry's got draft picks that are not going well, but I think overall he's pretty much like right now, I think he's pretty much average in the league. And if there certain things turn out better, that could change quite a bit. Like if Nick Harris comes back and plays really well, that would be a thing, because I think ultimately he's going to be their center next year. I don't, the Conklin contract has some very interesting wrinkles, sort of tentacles that come out from this. One, you immediately go, whoa, wait a minute. What's that mean for Jed? And right now I would say Jed's probably fine for next year, but we have a really difficult time seeing him get a 5th-year option picked up. And that doesn't mean they wouldn't sign him. It actually could mean that they decline the option and then just extend him, because then they could hide the money for a little bit. But I also, right now, I don't see any reason why you would pick up his option. I think more likely that, one, Jack Conklin is good. You know exactly what he does. And that's the other reaction I got is, well, this means James Hudson sucks. No, it just means James Hudson's not ready, and they're not going to gamble on, the line for their $230 million investment. Jack Conklin is very good. He's an all-pro level player, and they may really like James Hudson, but he's just not there yet. And they can't go, well, we think he will be ready by next year, or we hope he will be ready by next year. They can still have aspirations for him eventually being starter. Now that allows him to, in addition to being the swing tackle, now he can try to push Jed for left tackle. Obviously he has experience over there, and he can see if he can sort of make that interesting and make, the byproduct, make Jed work a little bit, which to me, I don't think is a bad thing. There are things that I watch with him where I'm sitting there going, I don't want to say he doesn't care, but it just seems like there are details and effort things where I'm sort of like, you could be doing better than this. And maybe that's a way to get him to push himself a little bit more. And obviously he's got to sort of realize in his head thinking, if I don't get there, it's going to, I'm not going to get that option picked up, or I'm not going to get that next contract. And I'm going to be sort of looking around. Now, on the same point, one, I think Jed is over criticized. I think people have this insane notion that the Browns need 5 Hall of Famers.
Yes.
They have 3 all pros. They are spoiled.
Yeah.
I don't think Posick will be back unless there's just no market for him. And they're like, that was a fluke. Bill Callahan is a magician. That is all him. Ethan Posick has not made money in the NFL. So for him, he could decide, no, I want to stay here. I love Bill Callahan. And he said as much. He said, like, he credits Bill Callahan for being able to sort of elevate his game to what it is. But if somebody's going to offer him like $10 million a year, I think he's made like maybe $5 million, $6 million for his career so far, because he was a second round contract, and he's on a league minimum deal with the Browns. Like, so for him, go get the bag. You have not had your chance, so go get it. Like, I totally understand that. I don't think the Browns can afford to pay yet another premium contract. Jed Wills is going to make $6 million next year. They can't afford to do all of this. So I think he's going to go. Obviously, the question you have to ask yourself coming in is, because Nick Harris was going to start.
Yes.
Was Nick Harris just really, really good? And they're like, wow, man, this guy's great. And like, thank God we've got Ethan Posick, but we were like ready to go. Or was Ethan Posick just such a huge surprise once he got in there that they had no idea he could do this? Or I don't know where they come out on that, but I think ultimately you have to get to a point where either maybe Posick is just that good, or they, Bill Callahan can say, no, we've got this, and obviously it depends. How has Nick Harris's knee recovered? The beautiful thing about him hurting it so early is he's got to be pretty close, not to being fully healthy, but getting a good judgment on whether or not like it's doing well. He's on track, like where he is in terms of his ability to take, to be ready to go, to enjoy a full productive offseason, because obviously he's going to need it. So, and you already have Jed, you've got to get that sorted out. But like, if he can't do it, James Hudson gives you another option. It would not surprise me, if they get the NFL draft, if like there's somebody they really like, they may grab somebody again, if the opportunity arises. But like, that's sort of where, these are the decisions they have to make. Jack Conklin's a major decision that sets the tone for a lot of things. It's, again, surprises me, but I understand the logic behind it. It makes all the sense in the world. If they feel good about his knee, he's great. And you don't need to have, let's put it this way, opponents are going to find the weak link wherever it is. So if you had a crappy right tackle, they just put their best guy on the right tackle. Sure. They're good with Conklin over there. Now they can, if they have to, they can shift the protection a little bit over to the left. They can do some things to compensate. But like I said, I think Jed Wills is over criticized. I think he's better than people give him credit for. That doesn't mean he's great. That doesn't mean the Browns can't do better. It just, there are so many teams that are doing so much worse than what he can offer. I will be curious to see, one, how he finishes out these last two games and how he sort of answers the bell into next season. But that's, these are this is where they're at. They've got all offensively, they're not done, but they're kind of done. Like they want, one of the things they want, clearly they want to get that jet guy. They'd love it to be Anthony Schwartz. Demetric Felton's been doing it. Obviously, Jakeem Grant could have done it if he, he's going to be a free agent. I don't think he's going to be back. They want somebody who can do that thing. But in terms of like your receivers, your main guys, Cooper, Njoku, and Donovan Peoples-Jones, I think they're thrilled with what they have there. Yeah. David Bell, we'll see where he goes. He's fine. I'm still sort of in this position where I sit there and go, I don't know really why they picked him relative to what they're doing, but because they want speed. They've obviously made such an effort to get faster. And then they take a guy who's like Jarvis Landry, clone type guy, younger and we'll see. He obviously, I think he's a guy who can get a lot better. I think they're going to go get another tight end at some point. I do think Pharaoh Brown will be back. I don't think that was a accident that Pharaoh Brown, who had played with Deshaun Watson and had been on the Browns before, was suddenly back. Yeah. I think that is a thing. Whether they want to go get another veteran, I'm certainly not giving up on Harrison Bryant, I think, but this becomes a pivotal year for him. But I would not be surprised if they draft one in case Harrison Bryant doesn't work out, just to give them another option in terms of that thing. I think they're going to have, we talked about running back, they're going to have to address one of those. But offense is like, for the most part, done. And it becomes all about, one, maximizing that side of the ball, and then everything becomes about defense and special teams.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I'm interested to see how these next two games go in terms of how you talked about, like, that will be attractive to free agents if we can finish out in a really strong way, especially on the offensive side. Like, I'm curious to see what types of guys this offseason are like, I really want to come play with Deshaun Watson after, seeing the improvement he's making throughout the end of this season. I look at a team like Buffalo that is a similar destination to Cleveland, where it's not like, oh, players really want to come move to these cities. But because of the caliber of play in Buffalo, guys like Von Miller were like, oh, I want to go there. Like, this is a place I want to play because of what they're doing. So I think that's why these last few games here could really have an impact just on truly even like defensive players wanting to come because of what they're seeing on the offensive side of the ball. Like, if you're seeing Deshaun play really well and seeing the offense clicking and seeing how excited everyone is to play with him, I think that can have an effect on both sides of the ball, and hopefully getting some free agents to even say like, hey, I'll take a little bit less because this is somewhere I think we can really do something great. So it'll be interesting.
Right. I think Deshaun Watson knows that's what's on the table. Maybe he's, at least he doesn't say it, but he's obviously very focused on his own development, but I think he understands what's available, what that can mean. Look, when obviously Jadeveon Clowney said as much, Jarvis Landry was pretty plainly open in saying that if Deshaun Watson ended up either New Orleans or Atlanta, he was going to sign wherever he went. That's just two players that we know of. There are others. Deshaun Watson, whatever you think of him off the field, may mean more money and years on it. And that's the nature of the beast. The game is finite. You only have so long to play it. So you want to play it in a position that's going to be good for you. Certainly, if the Browns can score a lot of points, the defense gets to be put in predictable situations. If you get to go rush the passer a whole lot, or you get to play, record interceptions because they're going to throw. Like you're loving life. It should at least allow the premium player. The Browns should be able to at least get in the door to talk to premium players. Like if it's a Deron Payne, that opening the door is big. He's still going to get. He's going to get premium dollars wherever he goes. But if he's open, allowing that conversation. But if it's somehow Brandon Cooks, who seems intent on doing this, forces his way out of Houston, and were to be cut, I don't think that's going to happen, but certainly his preference. Does he then want to come back to reunite with Deshaun Watson? Does Jerry Hughes, who's currently with the Texans, want to? I don't think he knows Deshaun Watson, but is he a guy that wants to jump on board with that? There are a number of these players, and then those guys, they might be willing to take less. Where you run into that situation where you have guys who are like, I want to win, I want to get a ring, I want all those things, and you get in that situation where you're like what the Philadelphia Eagles were, where you're getting, then you can do things like add Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh. Now, I think that part may take another year. Yeah. We'll see, but I think that's where they've got to go, and I think those two games are important. They've got to do well, but I think particularly offensively, if they can start showing things on that side of the ball, then it's going to get guys excited about the prospect of coming to Cleveland. So it's big, and this is part of the thing which is driven me so nuts about this. It's like, you knew going into the season, the last 6 games are going to be the most important. And like everybody's trying to, or I shouldn't say everybody, but there are a number of people who are like trying to hit the, eject button, and we're not even through those games. Like this was the whole thing. Like Deshaun Watson was the season. So we had to make that part work. That part has to be comfortable. It seems like he's getting a lot better. Again, it just drives me nuts about the Saints game, is like it felt useless in that respect. Yeah. If they play well and beat a capable Washington team, it's a big win for them. If they beat the Steelers, obviously that's a big win for them. For sure. And if you get those 2 wins, you end up 8-9, even though it's 8-9, I think the perception is going to be that this team's trending in the right direction. If they lose one or both of those games, I don't think it necessarily means you're heading in the wrong direction. It just becomes a missed opportunity. And I think that's where the motivation comes, is I think they understand it. I think that's why those players are motivated, even though they are saying and they have to, and obviously they're competitors. They're not in the postseason. That sucks. But they understood what this meant, what Deshaun Watson means to this team, and what this really get. And again, we talk about this. This is why they don't want to start over. I cannot emphasize enough. It's interesting to listen to them talk about it. Like Amari Cooper's the one that's very sneaky with this, because Amari Cooper's a really smart guy. He always offers an interesting perspective in that he's like, no, this thing with me and Deshaun Watson's going to be very good. We've just got to, get there. David Njoku, we're going to get to that point where we can do this, that, and the other thing. And, David Njoku's always that guy who's very... Right.
He said they're going to be Patrick and Travis. So
yes. Now, there is one part of that I sort of understand what he's saying. Like, and I talked about with Jake Burns, is like, you get into the scramble drill, and there are certain rules to the scramble drill. Like, play breaks down. If you're on, let's say Deshaun Watson's rolling to the right and the play breaks down. Well, if you're on the left side of the field, you're supposed to work your way to the right. If you're short, you're supposed to go deep. If you're deep, you're supposed to go short. However, and those are the basic rules, but then there's a feel and there's a chemistry process where you get into a situation where Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes know each other so well. And obviously Patrick Mahomes has freakish ability where Travis Kelce's like, oh, he's rolling right, I'm going left, because I know he can throw me the ball, and he knows I'm going to be there, and we can make this thing happen. And you've got to be able to figure that out. And I think that's where like training camp and stuff is going to be very, very important to these guys. And on that part of it, I understand what David Njoku's saying. Now people are going to sort of be like, come on.
Right. But the best duo in the league.
But well, I mean, look, if you're David Njoku and you're sitting there going, I've had a great year. Obviously David Njoku's never been a wilting flower on anything, but like that becomes important. But like, I think part of that, what they're saying, especially guys like Amari Cooper and Jack Conklin and some of these other guys, is they desperately do not want to have to then go, who's our coach now? What are we going to do? What does this look like? I think they like where this thing is going. And I think there's a part of that. And look, players aren't the be all end all with coaching and who should be the coach and who shouldn't be, but they signed up for this. And I think they understand where they want to be. And I just remember any number of times of Joe Thomas hating starting over and how often they had to do it and how much it was a drain on him. And I like a guy like Joel Bitonio, I cannot imagine what he would think if they're like, oh, we're doing this over again.
Yeah.
At where he is in his career. It's just, and Deshaun Watson and look, money had everything to do with why Deshaun Watson's here. No one is stupid in saying otherwise. That's the nature of the beast. That doesn't mean he doesn't also like what he's hearing from Kevin Stefanski. He doesn't like the relationship, doesn't like the things that this offense can do and where they can go. Again, I think that Jacoby Brissett angle is valuable. I think the fact that Kevin Stefanski has effectively run 3 different offenses with 3 different quarterbacks is really important. People think he's I get this a lot. He's inflexible. He's stubborn, which is really weird to me. Considering he keeps like players are like, no, he's really adaptable. He listens to us and all these other things. And you're like, what inflexible anyway. So that's why I am excited for these games. I'm really excited to see what happens with Washington. I'm hoping it's like the forecast is like, I think around here is like 50 degrees. I hope it's like that in Washington.
Yeah.
And their garbage field is in the best shape it can possibly be. Because I do want to see what this team can really do. I think they want to see what they can really do. Like that's exciting for me. That's exciting for these players. Win or lose, that part is fun. Now, obviously, winning is more valuable than losing at this point. But it's those type of things are what needs to happen for this team to progress.
Yeah, I mean, I also am looking forward to seeing how the 2 games go in terms of mostly Deshaun making those leaps and bounds. I think the Washington weather, I looked at it the other day, it is supposed to be pretty good there as well. And I think that'll make a big difference because obviously I don't want to see another game that is a fake football game. I'm not going to watch that again. Wouldn't be looking forward to that. But I think that's just the biggest takeaway at this point, is what that's going to look like. When you talked about though, the guys not wanting to start over and in terms of the players not wanting to start over with the coaching staff, I feel like sometimes we almost give, not we, but like the fan base in general puts too much onto coaching that it's almost disrespectful to the players in some way, where it's like the players also want to, at the end of the day, be accountable and make the plays and not just say, oh, it was the coach's fault. Like they are grown adults. They are doing a job here and they don't want everything, I think, to be deflected onto coaching. And I'm sure that's not how they look at things when they have a drop in the game or a mistake is made. I think the perspective that they have might be a little bit different than what the fans would think because, they care about the work that they are putting out there. So that's kind of the other thing I've just been thinking about with all of these conversations about coaching and what the players would think of that.
Indeed. All right. We've gone a long way. Very curious to see how this will go. Now, Abby, your record on this podcast, I think, is undefeated. I could be wrong. You
Maybe.
Probably know.
I came on before Carolina.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to remember the last one. There was another one this season. I don't remember what it was before.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at it, but I'm fairly sure you've won. I think the Browns have won before each time you've been on. Not to mention, this is going to be the first time you're going to go back-to-back weeks. So you'll actually get to talk about a game if they win.
We'll see.
You'll actually get to talk about that. I don't know how to explain it, but the YouTube thing has been enormous. The last episode we did with the Ravens, it like tripled the one we did the previous week. So we super huge appreciation for all the people on YouTube. Please subscribe and all that stuff. If you are on there, you can also check out Abby's latest video talking about some of the changes she'd like to see with this team. But yeah, beyond that, tell a friend or some of you, maybe it was Christmas, telling all your family to listen. If that was the case, great. Like, subscribe, review, all those things that'll help us out. And we will be back next week.